The pigeon came back with blood on its wing. Miriam Dale was asleep beneath a leaking roof, wrapped in her dead husband's old mail coat, when something struck the broken loft window above the abandoned post office. At first, she thought it was wind. Then came the scrape of claws, a weak flutter, and a sound like a living thing begging not to be shut out. The town had laughed when the widow spent her last $8 on the ruined Pigeon Loft. They said it was filthy, useless, a dead place from a dead profession. Nobody sent messages by bird anymore. Nobody cared about the old mail routes, and nobody believed Miriam when she said her husband's fatal accident had never felt right. But when she opened that window, an old gray pigeon fell into her hands with a metal band still locked around its leg. Its feathers were cold. Its heart beat fast against her palm, as if it had carried fear across the whole town. The bird should have been long gone. Instead, it had come home. And tied beneath that tiny band was the first sign that one letter, never delivered, had survived long enough to threaten the most powerful man in town. Morning came through the broken boards in thin gray stripes. Miriam woke to the sound of the pigeon moving above her head, a soft, nervous shuffle in the rafters. For one breath, she forgot where she was. Then the smell of damp wood, bird dust, and old paper pulled her back. She was still in the ruined loft above the closed post office, still wrapped in Thomas's mail coat, still homeless enough that a place the town called unfit for birds had become her shelter. The pigeon stood on a beam near the window, one wing held close. A line of dried blood marked the sill where it had fallen in the night. Another faint line crossed the floorboards, not toward the window, but toward the back wall. Toward the message boxes, Miriam rose slowly. Her knees ached from sleeping on boards. Rainwater had collected in the tin pan beside her bedroll. The loaf heel in her pocket had gone hard, but she broke off a piece and placed it near the bird. "You came a long way for something," she whispered. The pigeon did not touch the bread. It turned its head toward a wooden box nailed beneath the highest rafter. Most of the old message boxes hung crooked or open, their little doors warped by weather. This one was shut tight, not swollen shut, not stuck with age. Nailed shut from the outside. She took Thomas's small mail knife from the pocket of his coat. It was not much of a weapon, but it had opened thousands of cords, seals, and canvas ties. Thomas had kept the blade sharp enough to cut string without tearing paper. He used to say a letter could survive rain, distance, and bad roads, but not a careless hand. The memory tightened Miriam's throat. She pushed it away. There was a roof to patch, a bird to keep alive, and a box someone had wanted sealed. She set the knife under the first nail. The metal did not move. The nail head was too clean, too new. The box was old pine, dark with dust, but the nails were bright beneath their first skin of rust. Miriam stopped. Who would nail shut a dead bird box after the post office had closed? A knock sounded below, not at the street door, at the warehouse door beneath the loft. 3 hard strikes, spaced like a man who expected to be obeyed. Miriam tucked the knife away and climbed down the narrow ladder. Through the cracked warehouse window, she saw a man in a city coat too clean for the mud outside. He held a folded paper in one gloved hand. "Mrs. Dale," he called. "Mayor Varn sent me." The name moved through the empty warehouse like cold air. Miriam opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. "The mayor has no business here. He has business wherever there is a public hazard." The man lifted the paper. "This property may have been sold, but the town retains the right to inspect structures considered unsafe or unsanitary. I bought it yesterday. That is why we are being prompt." Behind him, 2 boys stood across the street, pretending to look at a wagon wheel. One pointed toward the roof, then quickly lowered his hand. The man leaned closer. "There are concerns about disease. Birds, droppings, old nesting material." Miriam looked at his boots. No warehouse dust, no pigeon stain. He had not been inside. Who complained? "The mayor does not disclose civic concerns. Then the mayor can schedule an inspection in writing." The man's smile thinned. "Have you disturbed anything in the loft?" Miriam kept her face still. "I slept there. That tends to disturb dust. I mean the old pigeon fixtures. Boxes, cages, anything attached to the beams." The words struck harder than the knock. She had told no one about the nailed box. At the auction, men had laughed too loudly to look past the filth. The clerk had handed her the deed with 2 fingers, as if poverty might stain him. No one had climbed to the loft after she arrived. No one should have known which part mattered. The pigeon fluttered above, a weak burst of wings against the floorboards. The man's eyes lifted at once. So, there is still a bird. One, Miriam said. You should have it removed. Old messenger birds carry sickness and trouble. Trouble does not usually need feathers to find a widow. For the first time, his polished expression cracked. He folded the paper and pushed it through the gap. Inspection notice, 48 hours. Miriam did not take it until he released the edge. On the back, in small pencil marks, someone had written 3 numbers, 7143. Her fingers tightened. They looked like route numbers. When she climbed back to the loft, the pigeon had left the bread untouched. It stood beside the nailed box, its injured wing trembling, its banded leg lifted as if the metal hurt. Miriam moved closer and saw the band clearly in daylight. Not a breeder's mark, not a simple number, a letter, a dash, and a file sequence. Thomas had taught her to recognize them when he spread delivery logs across their kitchen table. Legal notices, court summons, land claims, the kind of mail men pretended was dull because it could take a roof from over a family's head. Miriam raised the knife again. The first nail came loose with a soft cry of wood. The pigeon did not fly away. The second nail bent, then pulled free. Behind the little door, something shifted. For a moment, Miriam heard nothing but rain tapping the roof and the bird breathing beside her. Then, from inside the sealed box, a stack of old paper slid downward and struck the wood with a dry, waiting sound. Miriam did not open the papers at once. The loft was too cold for trembling hands, and the pigeon's wing had begun to shake again. Whatever had waited inside that nailed box would have to wait a little longer. Living things came first. Thomas had believed that about mail horses, stray dogs at stations, and women waiting for pension checks. A message mattered because a person mattered at the end of it. Miriam tore a strip from her underskirt and warmed it between her palms. The pigeon backed away when she reached for it, then stopped as if strength had left all at once. Up close, she saw the wound was not deep enough to kill it, but sharp enough to slow it. Something had grazed the wing, a wire, a nail, maybe a stone thrown by someone who thought cruelty was funny until a grown man paid him for it. She wrapped the wing gently, using the skill she had learned from Thomas on winter routes, when birds sometimes returned with ice in their feathers. The pigeon's heart hammered beneath her fingers, its banded leg curled tight, guarding the metal ring. I won't take it, Miriam said. Not until I know what you brought home. The papers from the box lay in a slanted pile on the floor. They were not letters, not exactly. Most were envelopes, brittle and yellowed, with their contents missing. Some had delivery marks, some had court stamps. Several had names Miriam did not know, but one name stopped her. Calder Reed. She had seen that name carved into the lintel of a boarded house at the east edge of town. A family had lived there once until a judge ruled they had abandoned their claim by failing to appear. People said the Reeds had run off. Miriam remembered Thomas coming home quiet that week, rain dripping from his hat brim. He had only sat with his hands around a cold cup and said, "Some absences are arranged." At the time, she thought he meant grief. Now she looked at the empty envelope addressed to Calder Reed and saw a court notice stamp in the corner. Delivered, the stamp claimed, but there was no receipt mark. Rain began before noon. Water pushed through the roof and overflowed from the tin pan onto the boards. Miriam set the envelopes on a dry crate, weighted them with Thomas's mail knife, and climbed down to the warehouse. There was no stove, no bed, only a corner where the roof still held, and old canvas bags that smelled of dust and mice. She had 11 cents left. At the mercantile, the clerk looked at her coat before he looked at her face. Thomas's brass mail buttons had gone dull, but people still recognized them. Some lowered their eyes. Others watched too long. I need a handful of grain, Miriam said. For yourself or your new tenants? The clerk asked. 2 men near the stove laughed. For a bird. That loft will be condemned by Sunday, one man said. Mayor says disease travels fast. So does gossip, Miriam answered. The clerk measured a small scoop of cracked corn as if every kernel cost him mercy. Miriam gave him 8 cents and kept 3. On her way back, she saw Sheriff Lyle standing across from the old post office, looking up at the roof. He did not pretend coincidence. Mrs. Dale, he called. You ought not keep animals up there. 1 pigeon is not animals. 1 is enough if it carries sickness. Or memory. His eyes narrowed. Careful with old things. They don't always belong to the person who finds them. Miriam held the grain close. Then whoever lost them should have kept better watch. When she climbed back into the loft, she knew before she saw it. The mail knife was on the floor. The crate had shifted. One envelope was gone. Not all of them. Not the obvious stack. Just one. The envelope addressed to Calder Reed. For a long moment, Miriam stood still, listening. The pigeon was on the rafter, alive, watching the open door. Rain tapped the roof. Somewhere below, a board creaked. She ran to the back stair, but the yard was empty except for mud and a single print near the alley gate. A man's boot. Narrow heel. Clean edge. Not a farmer's. Whoever entered had not searched like a thief. He had known which envelope to take. Miriam came back up and sat with the remaining papers spread before her. Panic would waste time. Thomas had taught her that too. When a pouch split open on a muddy road, you did not curse the mud first. You counted what remained. She lifted another envelope to the gray window light. At first, it looked empty. Then the paper thinned under the brightness, and a ghost of writing appeared where pressure had marked the inside flap. Not ink. An impression. A name pressed hard enough through the missing letter to bruise the paper. Eleanor Voss. Another lost house. Another family said to have missed a hearing. Miriam checked the seal. It had not been ripped. It had been warmed, eased open, emptied, and pressed shut again with patient fingers. The wax looked honest until the light exposed a crescent where heat had softened it twice. This was not neglect. This was not old mail forgotten in a dirty loft. Somebody had opened legal notices, removed what mattered, sealed the envelopes again, and let families lose land while the town record claimed delivery had been made. The pigeon hopped down from the rafter and pecked once at the empty place where the Calder Reed envelope had been. Miriam looked from the bird to the sealed papers and felt the cold in the loft change shape. The danger was not that old letters had survived. The danger was that someone still knew which ones needed to disappear. By afternoon, the rain had thinned to a mist that silvered the telegraph wires and made the town look softer than it was. Miriam wrapped the remaining envelopes in a piece of oilcloth and tucked them inside Thomas's coat. The pigeon watched from the rafter, one foot lifted, the metal band catching dull light whenever it moved. She wanted to stay and guard the loft, but the stolen Calder Reed envelope had changed the shape of the day. Whoever had taken it had not feared the rain, the height, or the widow sleeping above a dead post office. That meant the papers mattered. And if they mattered, someone still alive knew why. Ezra Pike lived behind the old livery in a narrow house with green shutters and a porch that sagged in the middle. He had once been postmaster, back when Thomas first carried county routes. Miriam remembered him as a stiff-backed man who could sort a sack of mail by touch and catch a false stamp at arm's length. Now, he opened the door only 2 inches. When he saw her coat, his mouth tightened. "Mrs. Dale, I need to ask about a pigeon." His eyes moved past her shoulder to the street. "I don't keep birds anymore. I didn't ask whether you kept them. I asked whether you remember one. I remember too many things. That is why I try not to answer doors." Miriam lifted the oilcloth just enough for him to see the corner of an envelope. A box in the loft was nailed shut. Inside were court notices with the letters removed. One was stolen this morning. Ezra's face lost color so quickly she thought he might faint, but his voice stayed flat. "Old paper breeds old trouble. Burn it. That is what someone else wants. Then for once, someone else is right." He started to close the door. Miriam put her hand against it. "The pigeon has a band, a letter, a dash, and a file sequence, not a breeder mark." Ezra stopped breathing for 1 second. Then he said, "You should leave that loft before dark." It was not advice. It was fear wearing a coat too thin to hide itself. From somewhere inside his house came the faint dry rattle of grain in a tin. Miriam looked past him. On the shelf behind his chair sat a small sack labeled cracked corn, folded neat at the top. "You said you don't keep birds." "I said I don't keep them anymore, but you feed something." His hand tightened on the doorframe. "Go home, Mrs. Dale. I don't have one." The words silenced them both. At last Ezra looked down at the mail coat, and grief moved across his face so briefly that Miriam nearly missed it. "Thomas was a careful carrier. I know. He marked every pouch, checked every seal. I know that too." "Then you should know careful men still die when careless men have power." Before Miriam could answer, the courthouse bell began to strike 6. The sound rolled over the wet street. 1, 2, 3. At the fourth strike, wings beat overhead. Miriam turned. The old gray pigeon, banded leg tucked close, had launched from the roofline of the abandoned post office. It flew low across the street, not strongly, but with terrible purpose. 5. It passed the mercantile chimney. 6. Then it angled toward the clock tower of Town Hall. Ezra made a sound behind her. Not surprise. Recognition. The pigeon circled once above the mayor's building and vanished beyond the slate roof. Miriam faced him. Why would it go there? Ezra's lips moved before any words came. Because some routes were never written in the public book. Whose route? He stepped back into the shadow of his doorway. I can't help you. You already have. He closed the door, but not before Miriam saw his hand shaking. Sheriff Lyle was waiting near the post office when she returned. His hat brim shed drops of rain, and his smile held no warmth. Long walk for a widow with unsafe property, he said. Fresh air is not yet against town law. Depends what it carries. He looked up. You still have that bird? Why? Birds on public roofs make people nervous. This is private property. For now. His eyes slid to the loft window. Mayor Varn takes disease seriously. Does he take missing mail seriously? The sheriff's jaw shifted. Only a little. Enough. I'd choose my accusations carefully. I asked a question, and I gave advice. Miriam climbed past him without another word, though every rung of the ladder felt like it was lifting her into a trap. The pigeon was already inside. It stood on the crate where the stolen envelope had been, damp feathers fluffed, one eye bright. At its banded leg clung a sliver of paper, no larger than a matchstick, caught under the edge of the metal. Miriam's fingers shook as she freed it. There were no complete words. Only the torn edge of a letterhead and half a stamped mark. Town Hall Records Room. Below it, in faded ink, were 2 numbers. 726. The same numbers written on the back of the mayor's inspection notice. Miriam looked toward Ezra's house through the misted window. The old postmaster had lied about forgetting. The sheriff had lied about concern, and the bird had flown a route that no living official admitted existed. But someone had admitted it in ink, and it had come back on the leg of a bird the town wanted gone. For the first time since Miriam had climbed into the loft, she worked as if the place might survive the week. She started with the corner where the roof leaked worst. The old post office had left behind a crate of bent nails, a roll of cracked tar paper, and 3 boards warped like old bones. None of it was enough for a proper repair, but Miriam had not lived beside a mail carrier for 19 years without learning how to make a temporary fix hold. Thomas used to say a thing did not have to be pretty to be faithful. By noon, 1 square of floor stayed dry. She moved the envelopes there. The pigeon watched from the crossbeam, stronger after cracked corn and water touched with salt. When Miriam held out her hand, it stepped onto her wrist, light as a rolled letter. Its band scraped against her skin. Only then did she read the mark properly. Cơ 743. The first letter had been rubbed nearly smooth, but it was there. Not a bird registry, not a loft number. A county file sequence. The same numbers had appeared on the inspection notice and the torn scrap from the Town Hall Records Room. Miriam laid the items in a line, the mayor's notice, the scrap from the pigeon's band, and 3 envelopes whose seals had been warmed and closed again. On the back of each envelope, pressed almost invisibly into the paper, were names. Calder Reed was gone. Eleanor Voss remained. So did Abram Lutz, a German cooper who had once lived near the Creek Road, and Sarah May Bell, a laundress whose little house had become part of the mayor's warehouse block. All 4 families had been marked in the county ledger as failing to answer a legal summons. All 4 envelopes claimed delivery. None had receipt marks. Miriam dipped Thomas's knife in soot and water, then rubbed the dark paste lightly across one envelope flap. The ghost of pressure marks rose like bruises. Someone had opened it with heat, removed the letter, and sealed the shell back together so the record could lie with a clean face. The pigeon fluttered down to the sill. Don't, Miriam warned, but it launched before she could reach it. For 6 seconds, the bird crossed the warehouse roof, wobbled in the damp air, circled the chimney, and came back hard, nearly striking the sill. Miriam caught it against her chest. Its whole body shook, but its head stayed turned toward Town Hall. You remember too much, she whispered. Below, wagon wheels stopped in the alley. Miriam looked through a crack in the boards. Mayor Silas Varn stepped down from a black carriage, clean boots avoiding the puddles. The sheriff stood beside him. Mayor Varn looked up at the loft. "Mrs. Dale, may we speak? You already sent a man. I prefer kindness when possible. Then you came late." A small smile moved across his face. "Grief makes people sharp. I do not blame you." Miriam climbed down but stayed on the warehouse steps. She did not invite him in. The mayor removed his hat. "This building is dangerous. The town has a duty to prevent harm, especially to a woman alone. A woman alone bought it legally, and a practical town can buy it back generously." He unfolded a paper. $25. Someone across the street whistled. Miriam stared at him. "For a loft you called a public hazard? For the land beneath it. We hope to clean this block and bring progress. The post office has been closed for years. Progress seems to have walked around it until yesterday." His eyes did not move, but something behind them tightened. "You have been through a terrible loss. Your husband served this town. My husband died serving it. Yes." His voice softened. "All the more reason not to spend your nights among droppings and broken beams. Sell me the property. I can arrange a room for you at Mrs. Hanley's boarding house." "And the bird?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. The mayor's gaze lifted to the loft window. Only for a heartbeat. But Miriam saw it. "What bird?" he asked. "The diseased one everyone keeps hearing about." "Ah," he smiled again. "The gray pigeon. Best to have it removed. Old messenger birds are stubborn. They return to places that no longer serve any purpose." Miriam felt the envelopes inside her coat like a second heartbeat. "How did you know it was gray?" The sheriff shifted. The mayor folded the paper slowly. "Half the town has seen it." "No," Miriam said. "Half the town has seen a shape on a roof. You named its color." Mayor Varn's smile stayed in place, but it no longer reached even the surface of his eyes. "Do not mistake suspicion for intelligence, Mrs. Dale. It is a common error among lonely people." There it was, a warning dressed as pity. He held out the offer. 48 hours before inspection, $25 before sunset. Miriam did not take the paper. "I'll keep my dirty loft." And the trouble with it? Especially that. The carriage left after him, but the street did not settle. People lingered in doorways, pretending they had not listened. Miriam turned to go inside when a man stepped from behind the feed store. He was thin, with a cap twisted in both hands. She recognized him from the auction. He had laughed when the clerk read her bid. "My mother was Sarah May Bell," he said quietly. Miriam stopped. They said she ignored a court letter. She swore until she died that no letter came. He looked toward the mayor's carriage disappearing down the street. "If you find that name in whatever you're finding, don't say I came to you. I have children." He pressed a folded scrap into her hand and walked away. Inside the loft, Miriam opened it. A date. A docket number. A house address, now owned by a company with Mayor Varn's initials hidden in its title. The pigeon hopped to the sill and peered toward town hall again. Miriam looked at the drying envelopes, the file numbers, the offer she had refused, and the bird no one could stop mentioning. At last she understood. The mayor did not want the loft torn down because it was filthy. He wanted it gone because one old gray pigeon still knew the way back. Miriam spent the night sorting ghosts. She pinned each empty envelope to a strip of old canvas with bent nails from the roof crate. Under every name, she wrote what she knew: court stamp, missing receipt, delivery mark, property lost. The list grew by lamplight until the loft wall looked less like a place for birds and more like a courtroom no judge had agreed to enter. Eleanor Voss. Abram Lutz. Sarah May Bell. Calder Reed, missing. That stolen envelope troubled her most. A thief who took only one thing was more frightening than a thief who took everything. It meant he knew what he had come for. Near dawn, Miriam found the first envelope that still held something inside. It had slipped behind a warped divider in the nailed box. So thin, she nearly mistook it for backing paper. The front bore the name Joseph Hanley, a widower who once owned riverfront lots now used for the mayor's grain warehouse. The seal had been warmed and pressed shut again, but the flap had caught on a fiber, leaving a narrow pocket unemptied. Inside was not the letter, only a torn bottom strip. 3 words remained. Must appear personally. Below them was half a date and the tail of a county clerk's signature. It was enough to prove the letter had been legal notice, not gossip, not private correspondence. A summons, a piece of paper that could decide whether a man kept his home. Miriam sat back on her heels. Thomas saw this, she whispered. The pigeon answered with a soft coo from the beam. She turned the strip over. On the back, faint as breath, someone had written a small mark in pencil. E. P. Ezra Pike. The letters struck her harder than she wanted to admit. By mid-morning, she carried the strip to Ezra's house, wrapped inside her glove. He did not open the door at first. When he did, he looked older than the day before. "You again," he said. "Joseph Hanley," Miriam answered. His face changed. Only a flicker, but enough. "You know the name. Half the town knows the name. You marked the back of his notice." "I marked many things." "Why?" Ezra looked past her toward the courthouse. "Because when mail started vanishing, I needed to know which pieces passed through my hands whole." "So you knew." "I suspected, and said nothing." His mouth tightened. "A suspicion is not a shield. It does not stop a sheriff at midnight. It does not feed a wife after a pension is threatened. It does not bring back a carrier thrown from a road." Miriam stepped closer. "Do not use Thomas as your excuse." His eyes sharpened with pain. "I am using him as my warning." For a moment, neither moved. Then Miriam heard boots behind her. Sheriff Lyle came along the lane, slow and smiling. "Mrs. Dale, Mr. Pike." "Discussing old mail?" Ezra withdrew into his doorway. Miriam kept the glove closed around the strip. "Discussing weather." The sheriff's gaze dropped to her hand. "Bad weather for the Hanley family, if I recall. Lost those river lots after failing to answer court." Miriam's breath stopped. She had not said Hanley where he could hear. Ezra had not said it aloud after the sheriff appeared. Lyle's smile faded as he realized the mistake. "Old case. Everyone knows it." "Not everyone knows which envelope I found this morning." His hand moved to his belt, not drawing, only reminding. "Careful. People keep telling me that, because you keep standing where careful women don't." When Miriam returned to the post office, the loft was too quiet. She knew before she climbed the ladder. No claws on wood. No nervous shuffle. No coo from the beam. The pigeon was gone. For one mad second, she thought it had flown. Then she saw cracked corn scattered near the sill, and a smear of blood on the frame. Not old blood. Fresh. Miriam searched the rafters, the message boxes, the warehouse floor. Nothing. Then she heard it. A faint battering sound from behind the building. She ran down the back stair and into the alley. Behind the old post office, where rain barrels leaned against the wall, sat a wire cage covered with burlap. Inside, the gray pigeon beat its good wing against the bars. "Lord have mercy," Miriam breathed. The cage was locked. Beside it lay a folded scrap of paper, weighted with a stone. "Birds carry sickness. Widows carry lies. Take both away before inspection." Miriam pulled at the lock until it cut her fingers. The pigeon struck the wire again, frantic now, its banded leg caught against the mesh. Then she saw the key. It hung from a nail driven low into the back wall, almost hidden behind a broken crate. A strip of blue thread was tied through its bow. Ezra's thread. She had seen the same blue thread binding the sack of cracked corn in his house. He had not taken the bird. He had found it and left the key where she could reach it without being seen. Miriam unlocked the cage. The pigeon stumbled into her hands, shaking harder than it had the first night. Under its wing was a new cut, shallow but cruel. Someone had tried to remove the band and failed. "No," she whispered. "No, you don't get to be hurt for remembering." The bird's leg trembled. Something was wedged beneath the metal ring. Not the scrap from the records room, a thinner piece. Freshly torn, Miriam eased it free and held it to the alley light. There were only 4 words. Not records room. West roof cornice. She looked up toward Town Hall, its clock tower rising over the wet street like a watchman that had learned to lie. The records were not inside the building. They were above it, and somebody had just hurt the only creature that knew the way. Miriam waited until the town bell struck 5. At 6, the pigeon would try to fly. She knew it in the way the bird shifted on the crate, restless despite the bandage, turning again and again toward the same window. Its body was too weak for distance. Its wings still trembled when it opened. But every time the clock tower gave one hollow note for the quarter hour, the pigeon lifted its head as if an old command lived inside its bones. Thomas had once told her that trained birds did not remember words. They remembered direction, hunger, light, release, return. A man could lie on paper, a town could lie in ledgers, but a bird, if it survived long enough, would still fly the shape of what it had been taught. Miriam cut a strip from Thomas's coat lining and tied it gently around the pigeon's wounded wing to keep it from opening too wide. "Not far," she whispered. "Just show me." The bird looked at her with its bright black eye. She tucked the four-word scrap into her glove. West Roof Cornice. Town Hall stood 2 blocks away, white-fronted and respectable, with a clock tower, a slate roof, and flower boxes beneath windows where clerks pretended power had a pleasant face. Miriam had entered it only twice since Thomas died. Once to sign the death papers. Once to ask why the accident report had been closed before the mail pouch was inventoried. Both times she had been given chairs too low and voices too soft. Widows were easier to dismiss when men could look down at them. At 5:40, she crossed the alley behind the post office and kept to the narrow spaces between buildings. The pigeon was wrapped inside her shawl, warm against her ribs, silent except for the quick beat of its heart. Rain had left the streets dark and shining. She reached the rear of Town Hall as the first stroke of 6 sounded. The pigeon moved before she did. By the 3rd stroke, it had forced its head from the shawl. By the 6th, it broke from her hands. It did not rise high. It skimmed past the rain barrel, struck the side of the building once, recovered, then climbed in short, desperate bursts toward the west roof. Miriam's breath stopped with every beat of its damaged wing. The bird landed beneath the cornice, claws gripping a narrow ledge no wider than 2 fingers. Then it began to peck, not at the roof, at a small square of wood painted the same color as the trim. A false patch. Miriam found the service ladder chained behind the coal shed. The lock was old, but the chain was not. She used Thomas's mail knife, not to cut it, but to pry loose the staple from rotten wood, one small act at a time. One nail, one hinge, one lie. The ladder groaned under her weight. Halfway up, a carriage turned into the street below. Miriam froze against the wall. Voices passed around the front of Town Hall. Mayor Varn's voice, smooth as polished stone, said, "The inspection is tomorrow. After that, there will be nothing left for her to sleep under." Another man laughed. "And the bird?" A pause. "The bird is old," Varn said. "Old things die when weather changes." Miriam climbed. At the roofline, the pigeon fluttered once, then pressed itself against the cornice, as if guarding the little square. Miriam wedged the knife under the painted patch. The wood gave way with a soft crack. Inside was a hollow space wrapped in tar cloth. Her fingers found paper first, then leather. A small bundle slid into her hands. 3 folded notices, a strip of map, and a piece of canvas cut from a mail pouch. On the canvas, in Thomas's handwriting, were 6 names: Calder Reed, Eleanor Voss, Joseph Hanley, Sarah May Bill, Abram Lutz, Margaret Klein. Below the names, Thomas had written one sentence: "Not delivered by my hand." Miriam gripped the roof edge until the shingles bit her palm. Thomas had known. Not suspected, known. The pigeon pecked weakly at the hollow again. "There's more?" Miriam whispered. At the back of the cavity lay a piece of paper folded so tightly it had become a hard little square. She opened it with shaking care. It was a delivery route page. Thomas's final route. The public log said he had driven the North Road that night, where mud and fog had overturned his wagon near Miller's Bend. This route page said West Road. Town Hall. 6 o'clock release. Return through Courthouse Lane. At the bottom, in another hand, someone had added a line in darker ink. Carrierdale, reassigned by order of S.V. Silas Varn. The rooftop tilted under Miriam's feet. For years, she had carried one grief. Thomas had died. Now, another grief opened beneath it. Thomas had been moved. Sent where someone needed him to be. Sent near the records. Sent into a route that vanished from the public book. A shout rose below. "Who's up there?" Miriam shoved the papers into her coat. The pigeon startled, flapping hard. Its injured wing opened too wide, and it tumbled from the cornice. Miriam lunged. Her hand caught feathers, then air, then the bird's body against her chest. The movement tore her balance loose. Her boot slipped on wet slate. For 1 second, the town fell away beneath her. She struck the ladder with her shoulder and clung there, gasping, the pigeon trapped between her arm and breast. Pain shot down her side. Below, a man cursed. "Mrs. Dale?" It was Sheriff Lyle. "Come down from there before you break your neck." Miriam looked at the papers inside her coat. Funny. Men only worry about a widow's safety when she is holding something they want. The sheriff's face darkened. You are trespassing on town property. And someone hid stolen mail in town property. A window opened on the second floor. Mayor Varn looked out, lamplight behind him. For the first time since Miriam had known him, he did not look amused. His eyes went to the pigeon, then to her coat, then to the broken cornice. Mrs. Dale, he said softly, whatever you found, you do not understand it. There it was. Not denial, not surprise, claim. Miriam felt the last piece settle into place. Thomas had not merely found missing notices. He had tried to mark every letter he had not delivered by his own hand. He had hidden proof where the pigeon could return. And when he died, the town had called it an accident before anyone could ask why his final route had been changed. The pigeon shivered against her. Miriam climbed down slowly, every rung a decision not to run. The sheriff reached for her arm when she stepped onto the ground. She pulled away. Inspection is tomorrow, he said. No, Miriam answered. Tomorrow is too late. Mayor Varn descended the rear steps in his shirt sleeves, his face composed again. You are tired. You have been living in filth, grieving a man you loved. Give me those papers, and I will see that they are handled properly. Like the letters? His mouth tightened. Like the accident report? The sheriff moved closer. Miriam backed toward the alley. Tell me one thing, Mayor. Why did you know Thomas had a final letter before I ever said it existed? For the first time, Mayor Varn said nothing. Silence answered louder than confession. Miriam turned and ran with the pigeon under her coat and Thomas's hidden root burning against her heart. She no longer needed to ask whether her husband's death had felt wrong. Now she needed to know who had needed him dead. Miriam did not go back by the main street. She cut behind the closed bakery and reached the post office alley with the pigeon pressed beneath Thomas's coat. The bird had stopped struggling. That frightened her more. Inside the loft, she barred the hatch with a broken chair and set the bundle from the cornice beneath a loose floorboard. Only after the papers were hidden did she unwrap the pigeon. Its eyes were open. Its breast moved fast. The wound under its wing had bled through the strip of coat lining, but the bird was alive. You did your part, Miriam whispered. Now let me do mine. She cleaned the cut with water warmed over a candle flame. There was no medicine except salt, cloth, and patience. The pigeon endured it with the silent dignity of a creature asked too much by human secrets. By midnight, the town began to answer. A stone struck the warehouse door below. Then another. Someone shouted from the alley, "Mad widow, sleeping with dirty birds." Laughter followed, quick and nervous. Miriam did not move toward the window. She sat beside the loose floorboard with Thomas's route page in her lap and copied every word onto the lining of his coat. If they found the papers, they would not take the only record. At dawn, a notice had been nailed to the warehouse door. Condemned pending emergency inspection. Under it, in smaller print, public hazard, disease risk, structural danger. Miriam read it twice. The ink was dry, too dry for something written that morning. A man in a leather apron stood across the street with a toolbox at his feet. He would not meet her eyes until the sheriff left the corner. Then he crossed quickly. Mrs. Dale, you're here to tear it down? I'm here to measure. He glanced toward the notice. Name's Owen Marsh. I fix roofs when people pay. I break them when the town pays more. That is an honest confession. It isn't confession. His voice dropped. It's warning. That order was signed yesterday noon. Miriam looked at the notice again. Before the inspection. Before the mayor came to offer you money. Owen shifted his toolbox. They told me to start with the loft wall. The bird boxes first. The air seemed to thin around her. Why tell me? My sister washed for Sarah May Bell. Said Mrs. Bell cried for weeks after losing that house, swearing no notice ever came. He swallowed. Maybe she wasn't. A door opened down the street. Owen stepped back and raised his voice. Rot all through the roof, ma'am. Dangerous work. He left without looking behind him. Miriam climbed to the loft. The chairs still barred the hatch, but the window was open. She had closed it. Now the slat lay on the floor, snapped in two. The loft had been searched, not ransacked wildly, searched with discipline. Her bedroll was cut open. The canvas strip of names had been moved, then replaced badly. 3 empty envelopes had been torn along their seams. The crate where she kept grain lay overturned. The pigeon stood near the water dish, head low. Miriam smelled it before she saw it. Bitter almond. She kicked the dish away so hard it struck the wall and broke. The pigeon flinched but did not fall. A few kernels of cracked corn lay scattered beneath the crate, darker than they should have been, damp with something oily. For a moment, Miriam could not breathe. They had not only come for paper, they had come for the witness that could fly. She swept every grain into a rag and knotted it tight. Then she checked the floor. Mud prints crossed the boards beneath the window. One print held in the dust near the message boxes. Narrow heel, clean edge, a crescent chip in the sole. The same kind of print she had seen by the alley gate when the Calder Reed envelope disappeared. But this mud was redder, clay-rich. Not from the post office yard. Town Hall's rear steps sat above red clay where the coal shed drained. The loft was not safe anymore. Neither was the bird. Neither was any paper she kept in one place. By afternoon, the rumors had ripened. At the mercantile, no one would sell Miriam grain. The clerk said the mayor had issued a health caution. Mrs. Hanley crossed the street rather than pass her. 2 boys followed, flapping their arms and making bird calls until Miriam turned and looked at them until they ran. Fear was doing the mayor's work faster than law. Miriam went instead to the burned edge of the mill road, where weeds grew high around the abandoned Reed house. A woman opened the door of a shack nearby before Miriam knocked. "You shouldn't come here," the woman said. "I need grain. You need a miracle. I will take either." The woman stared at Thomas's coat. "My father was Calder Reed." Miriam said nothing. "He died, saying the notice never came." The woman returned with a small sack. "If that bird carried any truth about my father, keep it breathing." Back at the loft, Miriam mixed the grain herself and fed the pigeon one kernel at a time. Near dusk, Sheriff Lyle arrived with 2 men and a crowbar. "Emergency entry," he called from below. "Town authority." Miriam looked at the loose floorboard. The original papers were no longer there. She had split them into 3 bundles. One beneath a roof tile, one inside Thomas's coat lining, one tied under the pigeon's old nesting shelf. "Let them search." The sheriff climbed first. His eyes moved over the loft too quickly, like a man checking whether another man had done his job well. "You look tired," he said. "You look expected." He smiled. "Where is the bird?" "Safer than your conscience." One of the men began prying at the old message boxes. Wood cracked. Miriam forced herself not to flinch. The sheriff held up the condemnation notice. "After tomorrow, none of this will matter." That notice was signed before inspection. His smile vanished. Miriam took the grain rag from her pocket and held it up. "And someone poisoned the feed. You can prove that?" "I can prove someone was afraid of an animal too old to matter." A sound came from the alley. Owen Marsh stood below, pretending to adjust his toolbox. He did not look up, but spoke loudly enough for the sheriff to hear. "Funny thing about orders. Copies stay at the town office." The sheriff turned. In that instant, Miriam saw the notice in his hand from the back. At the lower corner, half hidden beneath his thumb, was a penciled code. "Kobai Mwebunba." The same as the band. The same as the stolen route. The sheriff folded the notice fast, but too late. Miriam understood then that the order to destroy the loft was not about rot, sickness, or safety. It was filed under the same number as the bird. Ezra Pike came after midnight. Miriam heard 2 taps on the warehouse door, then one more after a pause. Not a sheriff's knock, not a warning stone, a postman's signal. The old kind Thomas had used when he came home late and did not want to wake the whole house. She climbed down with Thomas's knife in her hand. Ezra stood in the alley without a hat, rain silvering his hair. He looked smaller than he had in daylight, as if fear had been feeding on him for years and had finally reached the bone. "You should not open doors at night," he said. "You should not knock on them if you want them closed." He almost smiled. Then he saw the bandage on the pigeon through the loft shadows above, and the smile died. "They heard it. They tried to take the band." Ezra closed his eyes. "Then they know you found the cornice." Miriam stepped aside. "Come in." He climbed slowly, one hand on the ladder, breathing hard by the time he reached the loft. The pigeon watched him from the shelf. To Miriam's surprise, it did not shrink away. It gave one low coo. Ezra covered his mouth. "You know that bird," Miriam said. "I trained its mother," he whispered. "Thomas trained this one." The words moved through the loft like a candle being lit in a room of graves. Ezra pulled a flat packet from inside his coat and laid it on the crate. I cannot stand in a public room and say what I should have said years ago. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can give you what Thomas asked me to keep if anything happened to him. Miriam did not touch it. You let them call his death an accident. I let them call many things by the wrong name. His voice cracked. I had a wife dying in the back room, a pension they could cut, and a sheriff who told me old men could be charged for mishandled mail. Cowardice does not always feel like cowardice while it is saving someone you love. That does not make it clean. No. He looked at her. It only makes it true. Inside the packet was a route cipher. Columns of letters, numbers, clock times, and bird marks. C meant county legal. 7 meant West District. 14 meant disputed land notice. 3 meant carrier confirmation required. C by 14. A notice that had to be placed in a living hand, not left at a door. Not marked, delivered by a clerk, handed over by the carrier himself. Miriam sat down because her knees had gone unsteady. Every empty envelope on her wall had carried the kind of notice that could not legally be abandoned. Ezra pointed to a faded mark near the bottom of the cipher. If the carrier failed to make hand delivery, he marked the pouch and returned the notice. Thomas did that. More than once. Then where are the return notices? Not in the post office. Ezra's finger moved to a small symbol shaped like a wing. Emergency hold, bird route, used only when a carrier thought the regular pouch was compromised. The pigeon route. He nodded. Thomas believed his mail pouch was being opened before it reached the office. He started sending proof by bird. Where? Ezra's hand trembled over the page. A relay shelf under the west cornice of Town Hall. But not the final pouch. He would not put everything in one place. Where did he hide it? I don't know. He swallowed. But I know the last mark he wrote before he died. He showed her a small black square beside the clock symbol. Return not completed, Ezra said. It means the bird came home without the carrier. For a while, Miriam heard only rain. By morning, she began walking. Not to officials. Not to men who could burn records. She went first to the shack near the Reed place. Calder Reed's daughter, Ruth. Let her in after checking the road twice. When Miriam showed her the county copy of a receipt mark, Ruth stared at it. That is not my father's hand. Are you certain? My father could not write the letter R without lifting his pen twice. Ruth touched the signature with a work-roughened finger. This one is smooth. She opened a Bible and removed a folded scrap. A store receipt from the day the court claimed Calder Reed had received notice. It showed he had been 30 miles away buying seed meal. My mother kept it, Ruth said. She said proof mattered even when no one wanted it. At the Bell House, Sarah May's son gave Miriam the docket number he had hidden for years. At Abram Lutz's old cooper shed, a granddaughter brought out a barrel order signed on the same date his receipt had been marked in town. The weakest witness was Mrs. Klein, nearly blind, living behind the wash house with a stove that smoked. People said she remembered nothing. But when Miriam spoke Thomas's name, the old woman reached beneath her chair cushion and pulled out a yellow claim ticket. Your husband gave me this, she said. Told me not to lose it. The ticket bore no letter, only a pouch number and a time. 6:10. 10 minutes after the bird was released, Miriam returned to the loft near dusk with the cipher, 3 witness scraps, and a new understanding of Thomas's last night. Ezra's door was open when she passed his house. Too open. She stopped. The little room inside was empty. Chair overturned. Sack of cracked corn split across the floor. No Ezra, no coat, no lamp. Only a note pinned to the doorframe with a pigeon feather. Ask where the last pouch landed. Miriam looked toward the clock tower. The cipher did not end at the post office. Thomas's final route had ended above Town Hall, where no honest mail route should have ended at all. By the time the town meeting bell rang, Miriam had stopped trying to look clean. There was no way to scrub loft dust from Thomas's coat, no way to hide the bruise on her shoulder from the town hall roof, and no way to make a wounded pigeon look like anything but a wounded pigeon. So, she did not try. She entered the meeting hall carrying an oilcloth bundle, 3 witness scraps, and the route cipher folded against her ribs. The gray pigeon stayed hidden in a covered market basket at her feet. It breathed softly under the cloth, alive but weak. Mayor Varn stood at the front beneath the framed county seal. Sheriff Lyle leaned beside the door with his arms crossed. The room was full. Farmers, shopkeepers, laundresses, clerks, Boys who had thrown stones, women who had lost houses and learned not to say so loudly. At the side table sat Mr. Pritchard, the county recorder from Fairmont, and Miss Clara Bell, a young reporter from the weekly paper. Miriam had sent for both before dawn, paying a wagon boy with the last 3 cents she owned and Thomas's brass button. Mayor Varn smiled when he saw them. It was a politician's smile, wide enough to cover a wound. "Mrs. Dale," he said, "this meeting concerns the emergency condemnation of an unsafe structure. It is not a stage for private grief." "No," Miriam said. "It is a room for public records." A murmur moved through the benches. The mayor sighed gently, as if the whole town were watching him suffer a widow's confusion with Christian patience. "We all respected your husband, but grief can make patterns where none exist. Old envelopes, bird bands, childish markings, these are not proof." Miriam laid the first envelope on the table. Eleanor Voss. Legal notice marked, delivered. No receipt mark. She laid down another. Abram Lutz. Same. Another. Sarah Maybell. Same. The mayor did not look at the envelopes. He looked at the people whose names had begun to stir. "These families failed to appear in court," he said. "The county cannot be blamed for private negligence." Ruth Reed stood in the back. "My father was not negligent." The sheriff turned. "Sit down, Ruth." She did not. Miriam lifted the county copy with Calder Reed's supposed signature. "This says Mr. Reed received notice." Ruth stepped forward and placed the store receipt beside it. "And this says he bought seed meal 30 miles away that same day. My father could barely write his name. That signature is not his hand." Mr. Pritchard adjusted his spectacles. The mayor's smile thinned. "One disputed signature does not overturn law." "Then take 4, Miriam said. Sarah May Bell's son gave his docket slip. Abram Lutz's granddaughter laid down the barrel order. Mrs. Klein, trembling on Owen Marsh's arm, placed the yellow claim ticket on the table. The room changed. Not loudly. Worse. Quietly. People began to count. The mayor raised his voice. "Mrs. Dale has collected scraps from bitter families who lost legal claims years ago. Even if errors were made, she cannot prove malicious interference. Obstacle 1 had arrived wearing reason." Miriam unfolded the cipher. "C7143, she said. "County Legal. West District. Disputed land notice. Carrier confirmation required." These notices could not be left at doors. They had to be placed in a living hand. Sheriff Lyle laughed once. "According to an old code, no one here can verify. Ezra Pike can verify it." At that, the door opened. Ezra entered with one cheek swollen and a cut above his brow. His coat was torn, but he was walking. A gasp crossed the hall. Mayor Varn's expression sharpened before he could soften it. Ezra held up a duplicate cipher book. "I was postmaster. The code is real." The sheriff stepped toward him. "You should be at home, old man. I was taken from home." Ezra looked at Miriam, then at the recorder. "Held in the coal room behind the livery until Mr. Marsh found me when he went to fetch timber." Owen Marsh did not smile. Door was barred from the outside. The mayor struck the table with his palm. "This is outrageous. Accusations without the mail pouch, without original return notices, without a chain of custody. You bring a beaten old man and expect law to bow?" There it was. Obstacle 2. The missing pouch. Mr. Pritchard looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Dale, the mayor is correct on one point. These documents raise concern, but without the carrier's pouch or original return record, reopening county land judgments will be difficult." Miriam felt the room tilt toward defeat. The basket at her feet shifted. The pigeon pushed against the cloth. "Not now," she thought. "Please, not now." But the bird had never obeyed human fear. It forced its head through the gap, then climbed out onto the floor. A few people cried out. Sheriff Lyle moved at once. "That bird is evidence of a health violation," he said, reaching down. Miriam stepped between them. "Do not touch it." The pigeon fluttered, weakly, toward the center aisle. Its wing dragged. Its banded leg caught on something dark beneath its body. A strip of leather. The bird hopped once, twice, and collapsed beside Mrs. Klein's chair. The old woman bent with shaking hands. "There's a mark on it." Miriam lifted the strip. It was not just leather. It was a torn pouch strap, stiff with age, stamped with the old postal seal, and Thomas Dale's carrier number. The room stopped breathing. A child near the front whispered, "That's from a mailbag." Sheriff Lyle lunged. "Hand that over." Mr. Pritchard stood. "Sheriff, stop." The sheriff froze. Miriam turned the strap over. On the inside, written in Thomas's small, steady hand, was a direction. Under bell housing, West Tower. The mayor's face drained of color. Not much, but enough for everyone in the front row to see. Miss Clara Bell began writing furiously. Miriam looked at Varn. "You knew he had a final pouch. I knew no such thing. You knew enough to tear down the loft, to poison the feed, to ask about a gray pigeon, to file a condemnation under the same code as the notices you said were meaningless." Varn pointed at her. "This woman is unstable. She sleeps in filth, talks to birds, and has built a fantasy because she cannot accept that her husband died in mud like any other tired carrier." Miriam did not raise her voice. "My husband did not die in mud because he was tired. He died after marking every notice he had not delivered by his own hand." She laid the canvas strip on the table. "Not delivered by my hand." Then she read each name aloud. Calder Reed, Eleanor Voss, Joseph Hanley, Sarah May Bell, Abram Lutz, Margaret Klein. No one laughed now. Ezra stepped beside her. "Thomas told me if the regular pouch disappeared, the bird would still come home." "And it did," Miriam said, again and again. Mr. Pritchard faced the mayor. "The bell housing will be opened now." Mayor Varn's polished voice broke. "You have no authority to damage town property during a meeting." The recorder looked at the reporter, the crowd, the sheriff, and finally the pigeon lying beneath Mrs. Klein's gentle hand. "I have enough authority to preserve evidence." Owen Marsh took up his crowbar. For the first time, Sheriff Lyle did not move to stop him. As Owen and two farmers climbed toward the tower stair, Mayor Varn looked not at Miriam, not at the recorder, not at the crowd. He looked at the pigeon. He looked as if the dead had found feathers and flown back into the room. The bell tower gave up its secret in pieces. First came dust, then a strip of rotten canvas, then Owen Marsh's voice from above, tight and shaking. "There's something wedged behind the bell frame." No one in the meeting hall sat down. Even the children stood still. Mayor Varn remained near the front table, his hands folded, his face arranged into calm, but his eyes kept moving toward the door as if measuring distance. When Owen climbed back down, he carried a mail pouch stiff with age and blackened along one side. The brass clasp had been bent. The canvas bore Thomas Dale's carrier number. Miriam did not touch it. Not yet. Mr. Pritchard put on his spectacles, opened the pouch over the table, and removed what time had spared. 3 return notices, a partial route log, 2 wax seals wrapped in paper, and a folded statement written in Thomas's hand. The recorder read only the first line aloud. "These notices were taken from my pouch after I refused to mark them delivered." A sound moved through the room that was not quite a gasp and not yet a cry. Mayor Varn said, "A dead man's note, found after years in a damaged bag, proves nothing without review." "For once," Mr. Pritchard answered, "we agree. It requires review." That was not the thunder Miriam had imagined in her loneliest hours. No judge struck a gavel. No chain closed around the mayor's wrists. No lost deed returned by magic before supper. But the room had changed. The recorder sealed the pouch in a county evidence wrapper. Miss Clara Bell wrote down every name. Ezra Pike signed a sworn statement with a hand that trembled but did not stop. Ruth Reed pressed her father's store receipt beside the forged signature. Mrs. Klein gave her claim ticket without weeping, as if she had been saving her strength for that single act. Sheriff Lyle tried once to leave. Owen Marsh stood in front of the door with his crowbar in both hands. "Meeting isn't over." The recorder ordered the sheriff to surrender the condemnation notice, the inspection file, and the health complaint against the Pigeon Loft. When Lyle refused, Miss Bell asked him to repeat that refusal for the paper. He handed the folder over. Inside it was the same code again. C743, filed not as sanitation. Filed under disputed land notices. Mayor Varn closed his eyes for half a second. That was the only confession Miriam needed to see. By morning, men from the county office arrived. They locked the town records room, took the bell tower key, and posted notice that all land judgments tied to the West District mail route would be reviewed. Mayor Varn was not dragged through the street. He walked out of town hall under his own power, escorted by 2 county officers, his hat low and his mouth shut. Some people seemed disappointed that justice looked so quiet. Miriam was not. Quiet justice could still take a house back. It could still open a grave without digging. It could still make a town say a dead carrier's name correctly. 3 days later, Ruth Reed came to the old post office carrying a letter in both hands. It was brittle, smoke-stained at one corner, and addressed to Calder Reed. The county had released it under record supervision after matching Thomas's route log to the pouch. Ruth stood beneath the loft ladder and could not climb, so Miriam came down. "My father never saw it," Ruth said. "No. He died thinking no one believed him." Miriam looked at the folded paper, at the court date printed inside, at the line ordering Calder Reed to appear personally or lose claim by default. "He was telling the truth," Miriam said. Ruth pressed the letter to her chest, not like property, but like a voice returned too late and still worth hearing. Other letters followed. Not enough to fix everything at once. Some houses had been sold twice over. Some land had passed through companies with clean names and dirty beginnings. Lawyers would argue. Judges would delay. The county would move slower than grief. But the door had opened. Joseph Hanley's river lots were placed under review. Sarah May Bell's son was called to give testimony. Abram Lutz's granddaughter found her grandfather's barrel order printed in the newspaper beside the forged receipt. Mrs. Klein's claim ticket became the first proof that Thomas had used the bird route after he knew the pouch was compromised, and the pigeon lived, weakly at first. Then stubbornly, it slept in a clean crate near Miriam's bedroll, no longer caged, no longer carrying scraps for men who turned law into theft. Its band remained on its leg, but now the recorder had copied the number into county evidence. C7143 no longer belonged only to a hidden crime. It belonged to the record that exposed it. On the 7th evening, Miriam climbed to the loft and found Thomas's coat hanging from a nail where she had left it to dry. The copied route lines on the lining were still there, dark and uneven. She touched them once. Then she folded the coat carefully. She had not won because she found treasure. She had won because a bird came home, because a dead man had marked what his hand refused to betray, and because the messages stolen from the poor had finally begun to reach the people waiting for them. The loft did not become clean in a day. For a while, it looked worse than before. Once the county officers finished tagging evidence, the old post office stood open to winter air. Broken message boxes leaned against the wall. Floorboards were lifted where men had searched for more hidden papers. Dust lay in pale drifts over everything Miriam had tried to make livable. Even the dry corner she had patched was cluttered with rope, old nails, and folded notices marked with county seals. But no one called it worthless in her hearing again. That was the first change. The second came more quietly. Ruth Reed arrived with a broom. Sarah May Bell's son brought a bucket of lime wash. Abram Lutz's granddaughter came with 2 panes of glass wrapped in a quilt. Owen Marsh climbed the roof without being asked and patched the worst hole before sunset. Mrs. Klein sat on a crate below the ladder, nearly blind, holding the pigeon's clean water cup as if it were church silver. Miriam did not know how to receive help. For months, she had been given advice, warnings, pity, and offers meant to move her out of the way. Help was different. It did not push. It stood beside her and picked up a broom. The pigeon watched from the new shelf Owen built beneath the window. Its wing would never fold quite straight again, but it could hop, stretch, and turn itself toward the sun. The metal band remained on its leg. Mr. Pritchard had wanted it removed and locked in evidence, but Mrs. Klein had said, "That bird carried enough for the law. Let him keep his own name." For once, the law listened. Weeks passed. The newspaper printed the first story under the headline, "Missing Notices Reopen West District Claims." Then came interviews, affidavits, county hearings, and men in dark coats who asked Miriam to repeat the same facts until grief felt like testimony and testimony felt like work. Mayor Varn's portrait came down from the town hall wall. Sheriff Lyle resigned before the county board could remove him. Ezra Pike gave his sworn statement from a chair near Miriam's loft stove, one hand wrapped around a cup of tea, the other resting near the pigeon's shelf. He did not become brave all at once. Few people did, but when his voice shook, he kept speaking. One April morning, the first repaired letter case was carried back into the loft, not as evidence, not as a hiding place. As part of a new counter for the small community mailroom, the county allowed Miriam to keep in the old post office. People still used the modern office across town for official business, but they came here for something else. Copies of reopened claims, notices they wanted witnessed, letters they were afraid might vanish if sent through hands too smooth. Miriam stamped each receipt herself. Hand-delivered. Living witness. No phrase in the world sounded more sacred to her. She hung Thomas's mail coat on a peg beside the counter. For a long time, she had worn it because it was the last shelter she owned. Now it hung where the morning light touched the brass buttons. Not a relic, not a wound. A promise completed. Near the window, the gray pigeon stepped onto the sill. Not too far, Miriam warned. The bird tilted its head, as if age had given it the right to ignore her. Below, Ruth Reed stood with a packet of papers tied in blue thread. Her father's claim was not fully restored yet. None of it was easy. Lawyers had discovered ways to make truth walk through mud. But the case had been reopened. The lie had lost its locked door. Ruth looked up. Is he going to fly? Miriam opened the little wooden window. The pigeon hesitated. For years, it had flown because men trained it, because routes demanded it, because hidden papers needed a messenger. Now there was nothing tied to its band. No scrap, no warning, no last testimony caught under metal. Only air. It lifted from the sill clumsily, dropped once, caught itself, and rose above the roofline. People in the street stopped. A child pointed. Ezra Pike, standing with his cane near the post office door, removed his hat. The pigeon circled the town hall once. Not because it had to, because it could. Then it returned to the loft and landed hard on the shelf, proud and winded, as if any bird that had outlived so many lies was entitled to an imperfect landing. Miriam laughed before she realized she was crying. That evening, after everyone left, she climbed to the loft alone. The message boxes were clean now. Some held letters, some held folded claims. One, the box that had once been nailed shut, she left empty. Above it, she placed a small brass plate, for the letters that waited, for the hands that never received them, for Thomas Dale, who would not mark a lie delivered. Miriam stood beneath it while dusk filled the room with gold. The town had called her a widow with nothing left. It had called the loft filthy, useless, and dead. But a place does not die just because powerful men stop listening. Sometimes it waits in dust and feathers. Sometimes it keeps one wounded bird alive. Sometimes it gives a woman back her husband's name, her own voice, and a roof no one can laugh away. When the pigeon settled on the sill beside her, Miriam opened the window and let the quiet in. For the first time, there was no message to carry. Only home,